Welcome to Still Unanswered. I'm Maya Ellison. Tonight we take you to a quiet Tokyo suburb on the night the calendar turned, to a house beside a park where a family should have been gathering for New Year's, and instead a crime unfolded that has haunted investigators and a nation for a quarter century. Joining me is Dr. Kenji Sato, forensic criminologist and longtime advisor on cold case reviews in Tokyo. Kenji, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Maya. It's important to keep talking about this one. The Setagaya case stays with you, both for the brutality and for how much the killer left behind yet still managed to disappear.
Yeah, it's unsettling. To start, I want us to walk listeners through the basic facts slowly, so we all have the same map in our heads. On the night of December 30 into the early hours of December 31, 2000, all 4 members of the Miyazawa family were murdered in their 2-story semi-detached home in Kamisoshigaya, Setagaya Ward. Mikio, Yasuko, their daughter Niina, 8 years old, and their son Rei, 6. The family's grandmother, Haruko, lived in the adjoining half and found the bodies around 10:40 a.m. the morning of the 31st. Kenji, when you first read the case file, what struck you most about that discovery?
The normalcy of the morning scene and how that normalcy collides with the horror of what was found. Maya, it reads like 2 different worlds layered on top of each other. Haruko walking next door because she couldn't reach her daughter on the phone is an image that keeps coming back to me. Quiet winter morning, family routines, then the shock. That immediate proximity, living literally next door, adds a kind of psychological weight. The killer must have acted with a knowledge that someone was close.
Right. And that proximity is one of the things that makes the case so, visceral. I want to take people into the house now, calmly, step by step, because what the intruder did afterwards is as strange as the murders themselves. Kenji, can you outline the likely entry and the sequence investigators believe happened?
Sure. Investigators concluded the most likely point of entry was a second-floor bathroom window on the side of the house that faces Soshigaya Park. There was a slope and embankment from the park up to the back of the house. The damaged screen and muddy footprints pointed strongly to that route. Once inside, based on autopsy and scene reconstruction, the probable sequence is the intruder confronted Rei, the 6-year-old who was later found strangled on his bunk bed. Mikio sustained repeated stab wounds and was found near the foot of the stairs. Yasuko and Niina were upstairs, Yasuko apparently covering Niina, both stabbed dozens of times. The attacker used a sashimi knife he'd brought with him, which broke, and then used a kitchen knife from the home. The level of overkill on Yasuko and Niina is especially jarring.
That detail, Yasuko shielded Niina, that image is heartbreaking. What always unsettles me is the time after the killings. This wasn't a quick in and out. The intruder stayed. He moved through the house calmly. He ate, used the computer, used the toilet and didn't flush, and even tended to his own wounds. Kenji, for the audience, how rare is that behavior in homicide cases?
It's unusual, absolutely. Homicide offenders do sometimes linger, but the combination here, taking time to eat 4 ice creams from the fridge, drinking barley tea, using the family computer to connect to the internet around 1:18, 1:23 a.m., not flushing the toilet, and opening first aid kits to treat his own bleeding, gives us a portrait of someone oddly at ease within the crime scene. That kind of prolonged occupation suggests a complex psychological state, either dissociation, which can happen after extreme violence, or a deliberate calm that contradicts the brutal violence he committed earlier. Either way, it makes the killer's identity harder to intuit because he didn't behave like a panicked burglar.
So he eats. He uses their computer. There's that one timestamp around 1:20 a.m. that investigators point to as evidence he stayed for hours. But later reporting suggests the second time the computer seemed active around 10 a.m. was likely Haruko accidentally moving the mouse. Important to be precise. You have looked closely at the physical evidence. Tell listeners what the scene yielded, what the killer left behind that investigators could work with.
It's a remarkable amount of material, Maya. He left clothing items, a fleece jumper, a scarf, a bucket or knit hat, gloves, a hip bag, 2 handkerchiefs. There were shoe prints. Forensics recovered the killer's blood type, A, and a full DNA profile. There's fecal matter, undigested food that gives dietary clues, and traces of the sashimi knife that broke. Investigators also noted that shoe prints matched a Slazenger sports shoe model manufactured and sold in South Korea, not in Japan. All of this should be golden for identification, yet despite tens of thousands of interviews, detailed fiber analysis, and tracing of the clothing, no match has been conclusively found in Japanese databases.
It's almost paradoxical. A killer leaves so much and yet remains unknown. People ask me, listeners ask, how could DNA not give them a match by now? Kenji?
DNA gives you a profile, but you need a corresponding profile to match it against. Japan historically has had tight limits on DNA collection and narrower databases than countries that use investigative genetic genealogy, for example. The profile excluded domestic matches over the years and hasn't turned up in criminal databases. That's why there's been growing public debate about whether Japan should adopt broader investigative tools, phenotyping or genealogy-style methods, that could predict physical traits or connect distant relatives. But those approaches raise legal and ethical issues here, and as of late 2025, Japanese authorities remain cautious.
And that caution has real consequences. The victim's family and supporters have pushed for expanded use of DNA-based methods. They see what happened in the U.S. with the Golden State Killer and wonder, couldn't that help here? But then privacy advocates push back. It's a live debate. Kenji, can you explain what phenotyping would mean in practice for this case, sticking strictly to what's been discussed publicly?
Phenotyping, in the investigative sense, tries to predict outward appearance, hair color, eye color, sometimes facial structure from DNA. For Setagaya, advocates say phenotyping could narrow the pool of possible suspects, especially since the DNA suggested certain paternal line markers linked to East Asia, and some markers interpreted in media as suggesting a Southern European maternal line, though such interpretations can be oversimplified. Genetic genealogy, using consumer databases to find relatives, hasn't been widely used in Japan, and adopting those methods would require legal adjustments and robust privacy safeguards, which is why the conversation is still ongoing.
I want to pause on that phrasing, oversimplified, because it's important we don't slip into easy narratives. The sources note a paternal lineage, possibly pointing toward Korea, and that shoe evidence matched a model sold in South Korea. But fans of simple explanations sometimes turn that into definitive nationality claims, and that's dangerous. Kenji, you yourself have cautioned against ethnic stereotyping. Explain why.
2 points. First, a shoe model manufactured in Korea doesn't prove the wearer was Korean. Shoes are exported, people travel, and individuals buy foreign brands. Second, DNA markers can suggest statistical tendencies in ancestral lines, but not serve as a passport to identity. If we overinterpret those clues, connect them to nationality in headlines, we risk discriminatory profiling, which is both unjust and counterproductive. For forensic science to be useful in investigations, we need nuance and restraint.
Right. Let's go back to the night again. The knives. The sashimi knife breaking, and the attacker switching to a kitchen knife from the house stands out. What does that tell investigators about his preparations or lack thereof?
It tells us he brought at least one weapon, the sashimi knife, which could indicate premeditation. The blade breaking, reportedly in Mikio's skull, is a violent moment that may have startled or injured him, leading to bleeding and the need to treat himself with first aid later. The switch to a kitchen knife taken from the home suggests adaptability. Either the incident spiraled beyond the killer's plan, or he had contingencies.
Importantly, he left blood, his blood type A, and evidence of self-treatment. There's a sequence of choice and improvisation, not a purely opportunistic moment.
And then the money. Some cash was taken, over 100,000 yen by some reports, but other valuables were left. That makes motive murky. Was this robbery gone wrong, or something else entirely? Kenji?
The theft complicates motive. The fact that some cash was taken fits a robbery theory, but leaving other valuables untouched, alongside the extreme overkill on mother and daughter, argues against a robbery as the sole motive. It's possible money was taken to create a false trail, or the killer had mixed motives. Some investigators have suggested a personal grudge, though no credible suspect with a direct link has emerged after extensive investigation. Others point to a stranger, someone who planned entry from the park side. The evidence supports multiple interpretations, none decisive enough to close the case.
So we're left with competing theories. Let's go through them, one by one, and weigh them against the evidence. First, local youth or skater theory. In plain terms, the house backs onto Setagaya Park, which was a hangout area. What supports and undermines that idea?
Support. Proximity to the park and the presence of youth congregations could have produced a confrontation, noise complaints, or petty disputes that escalated. Some clothing at the scene matched youth fashion at the time, which fueled early speculation. Against it, the brutality and the calm post-crime behavior don't fit a spontaneous fight that escalated. Also, despite huge numbers of interviews and inquiries, no local youth matched the DNA profile or other forensic markers as of late 2025. It's a plausible scenario, but lacks hard forensic backing.
Short, plausible, but unproven. Second theory, the foreign national or Korean connection. We already touched on the footwear and some fraternal line DNA markers. What does this theory do well, and where does it overreach?
It connects two strands, the shoe model sold in South Korea and genetic markers that can lean toward East Asian paternal lines. That said, it risks overreach because the shoe alone doesn't mean nationality, and DNA markers aren't a nationality certificate. If investigators followed this too narrowly, they could miss other leads. Still, it remains an important line of inquiry, especially given the unique footwear evidence, something rare in Japanese cases, where footwear prints are harder to trace to foreign models.
Third, the military or U.S. connection. Some sources and blogs speculate about sand or trace evidence linking to U.S. sites. How much weight should listeners give to those claims?
Very little weight without official confirmation. Some bloggers have drawn speculative connections, California skate parks, military sites, based on trace materials, but mainstream Japanese reporting up to 2025 has not confirmed any substantive link to U.S. military personnel or specific foreign locations. Investigative science requires corroboration, and rumor often fills gaps where that's lacking.
Understood. Then there's the personal grudge or targeted attack theory. Overkill often suggests rage. But the investigation into Mikio's life turned up no clear enemies. What does that tell us?
It tilts the balance toward a stranger as perpetrator, but doesn't rule out a personal motive entirely. Overkill can be personal rage, but it can also reflect a particular pathology in offenders who attack families or children. Because investigators have not found a credible suspect with a documented grudge, and because the killer entered via a window at the rear and then behaved like a transient occupant, many lean toward a stranger rather than an acquaintance. Still, absence of evidence is not proof of absence.
Short, unresolved. Finally, the random burglar or spree killer theory. Could it have been an opportunistic break-in that escalated? Kenji.
Elements fit. Some theft occurred, the killer ransacked drawers, and a kitchen knife from the home was used. but the careful entry, the bringing of a sashimi knife, and the extended calm behavior post-crime don't align with a chaotic, panicked burglar. It's possible a burglar panicked and then dissociated, but that again feels less consistent with the evidence than a stranger who prepared to enter and then, whatever his psychology, acted with both extreme violence and later composure.
You sound cautious. Good. One question listeners always ask: how big was this investigation? The public often imagines a single team, but reports say it was enormous.
The Tokyo Metropolitan Police treated it as one of their largest investigations in peacetime. Tens of thousands of officers worked on it over the years. Police carried out something like 270,000 to 300,000 door-to-door inquiries during various phases, though numbers vary by report. They built a 3D printed model of the house in 2013 for training and reconstruction. This was not a small probe. It was sustained, massive, and international in public interest.
Yeah. Yet after all that manpower, the killer remains unidentified. That raises questions about investigative methods, law, and DNA policy. Let's talk about the legal consequences. One concrete change linked to this and similar cases was the abolition of the statute of limitations for the most serious crimes. Explain that to listeners. What changed and why it matters?
At the time of the murders, Japan still had statutes of limitations, even for serious crimes. Public outrage over cases like Setagaya helped shift opinion. By 2010, Japan abolished the statute of limitations for crimes punishable by death. That change means prosecutors can pursue cases indefinitely now. It was a major legal reform tied directly to a sense that some crimes, particularly those at the extreme end of violence, should not be subject to a clock. For Setagaya, it means, legally at least, the door remains open forever to bring a prosecution if a suspect is identified.
So legally, the country said, we'll wait forever. But practically, evidence ages, memories fade, witnesses pass away. That's why many investigators and family members talk about the urgency of new methods. Kenji, I want to ask you directly, what are the most promising forensic avenues still available that have not been exhausted, strictly speaking from public reports?
Based on publicly available information, reanalysis of the DNA using advanced sequencing and statistical phenotyping could provide leads. The fecal DNA sample is particularly robust and could be re-examined with the latest techniques. Looking again at clothing fibers, manufacturing distribution lists, and buyer records in a targeted way could help. International cooperation on the footwear trace checking, distribution, and purchasers in Korea and elsewhere remains an option. Finally, targeted public appeals in the community with updated images of the items left behind might jog someone's memory. The police have periodically renewed such appeals.
Short, new tech, renewed outreach. But there's a caveat: ethical and legal. We've touched on that. I want to devote a little time to the debate itself. On one side are victims' families and advocates calling for expanded DNA use. On the other, privacy advocates and legal conservatives worried about misuse. How do Japanese cultural attitudes shape this debate?
Japanese society tends to value privacy and social harmony, and there's historic caution about broad surveillance. Police in Japan also have traditionally placed great emphasis on confessions and visible policing, which influences investigative culture. The Setagaya case has become a focal point precisely because it challenges that culture. A case where science might help, but where adopting foreign methods raises anxiety about privacy, discrimination, and legal overreach. This isn't a uniquely Japanese tension, but the specific norms and legal framework in Japan make the debate particularly fraught here.
Right. And that's why this case matters beyond its own facts. It's a lens into law, public sentiment, and the evolving capabilities of forensic science.
Let's bring the victims back into our conversation for a few minutes. Humanize them beyond headlines. Mikio, Yasuko, Niina, Rei. Small portraits drawn from reporting. Kenji, what should people remember about these four?
Mikio was 44 and worked for a British marketing or consulting firm. He was a devoted father and office worker in suburban Tokyo. Yasuko was 41, a part-time teacher or tutor, close to her mother Haruko, who lived next door. Niina, 8, and Rei, 6, were children at the start of their lives. School photos in media coverage remind us of their ages and small joys. Haruko's role, living adjacent and discovering the bodies, also marks the family's tragedy as one that directly tore through multiple generations. These were ordinary lives, and that ordinariness is what makes the crime so unbearable.
Yeah. Haruko's ongoing memorials, flowers, drinks, children's items placed by the fence, are often reported in the press around anniversaries. Those rituals are part of how the community remembers and refuses to let the family become only a headline. Kenji, on a professional level, how should journalists and podcasters handle the wild theories that pop up online, those that claim the case is solved with some flamboyant suspect?
Carefully and with skepticism. There's been a lot of sensational foreign language coverage, mixing fact and speculation, sometimes inventing elements like Californian sand links or decisive DNA breakthroughs that official sources didn't confirm. Journalists should stick to verifiable reporting from credible sources, TMPD releases, major Japanese outlets, and avoid amplifying unverified online claims. Speculation can harm investigations and families, and it can spread ethnic or cultural biases. Responsible reporting means differentiating between official investigative steps and wild theories.
Verify, verify, verify. Now, I want to talk about the house itself. The episode title frames it as a house full of clues. The physical property, semi-detached, at the edge of a park, slope behind, has been treated almost like a character. What role does the architecture and the neighborhood context play in all this?
The house's layout is central. The semi-detached structure meant Haruko was literally adjacent. The back of the house faced Soshigaya Park with a slope that allowed someone to approach with relative cover. In 2000, redevelopment meant empty lots nearby, less natural surveillance, and fewer neighbors. That relative isolation made clandestine entry easier. The bathroom window on the second floor would be a hidden entry point from the embankment. In police reconstructions, including the 3D printed model built in 2013, investigators repeatedly emphasized how the neighborhood's physical features created both opportunity for the attacker and blind spots for witnesses.
So, a combination of timing, the New Year holiday when many are at home, and physical isolation created an especially vulnerable moment. Before we move toward closing, I want to ask you something a bit broader, Kenji. What does it mean for a society to live with an unsolved crime like Setagaya for decades, not just legally, but culturally and emotionally?
Living with an unsolved violent crime embeds a kind of unsettled grief into communal memory. For the family, it's an unresolved trauma. For the neighborhood, a persistent shadow. For the nation, a reminder that safety is not guaranteed, even in quiet suburbs. Cases like Setagaya can reshape legal policy, as we've seen with the statute of limitations, and they affect public discourse on policing, immigrants, youth culture, and technology. They also force societies to wrestle with uncertainty, whether to prioritize privacy or to expand scientific methods in the hope of closure. It's a long, difficult moral conversation.
Yeah. We have a few minutes left, and I want to end on two things. First, a practical note for listeners. If anyone has information that they haven't given police, how are they being asked to come forward? What's the official stance?
The Tokyo Metropolitan Police have periodically renewed public appeals and maintain case pages in Japanese and an English PDF that summarize the case and the evidence. They ask anyone with information, no matter how small, to contact the Seijo police station or the TMPD tip lines. Given the case's longevity, new and small details can be critical. Someone remembering an odd purchase, a piece of clothing, or a person seen near the park on that New Year's Eve might be helpful. The police also sometimes release images of clothes and items found to jog memories.
Short. Contact police. Second, and this is more reflective, what keeps you hopeful about solving this case, Kenji? Be honest.
I'm hopeful because science keeps moving forward. DNA technology today can do things it couldn't in 2000. The fecal sample and the blood evidence are still there to be re-examined. Also, cold case reviews sometimes succeed because of human factors. A witness retires and finally speaks. New records surface. Someone recognizes an old jacket in a photo. The family continues to press, investigators keep the file active, and public interest stays alive. Those are the small pillars of hope.
Hope. That's what we hang on to in this show's title, Still Unanswered. Because unanswered doesn't mean unpursued. Before we close, a quick recap for listeners who may have drifted in, brief and factual. Mikio, 44. Yasuko, 41. Niina, 8. Rei, 6. Night of December 30, 31, 2000. Entry likely via second-floor bathroom window from Setagaya Park. Sashimi knife brought in, it broke. Then a kitchen knife from the home. Intruder stayed for hours. 8. Used computer, used toilet, treated his cuts. DNA profile, blood type A, fecal DNA. Shoe prints indicate a Slazenger model sold in South Korea. Massive investigation, but no arrest as of late 2025. Case remains officially unsolved. Kenji, any last technical correction before we sign off?
That's an accurate, careful summary, Maya. I'd only add that the period after the killings. Estimates vary, but forensic and temperature data place the murders around 11:30 p.m. to shortly after midnight, with the killer's computer activity around 1:18–1:23 a.m. Those timeline details help anchor the reconstruction, but don't change the big unresolved questions.
Thanks. We'll close with a quiet thought. 2 decades on, the Miyazawa family's house remains a reminder that ordinary lives can be ruptured, and that the search for truth often outlives the headlines. If you've been listening and you learned something tonight, please, if you have any piece of information, no matter how small, contact the Tokyo Metropolitan Police. Keep the memory of the family human. Don't let them become only an anecdote.
And for anyone thinking about the science, re-examination of DNA and renewed, careful public engagement can still move a case. But we must balance progress with respect for privacy and avoid letting speculation harm the search for truth.
Thank you, Kenji. And thank you to our listeners for spending this time with us. Next week, we'll revisit another cold case, different in detail, but similar in one way. A family, a night, and questions that never stop. Until then, stay safe and keep asking questions. This is Still Unanswered. I'm Maya Ellison. Good night.